Arts Adventure is about art, artists, and how art is made. So stop what you're doing and come on along on our next Arts Adventure. Susan, what are you going to be doing today?
I am going to be explaining how to use layered texture on a canvas today. I'm going to be using a product called Liquitex modeling paste. It is a combination of a polymer with marble dust. This product is very hard when it dries, and a good thing about it is you can sand with it, you can paint on it with oil paint or acrylic. And something to keep in mind while you're using this product is if you have any skin irritations, to make sure you wear gloves. If you have an irritation to latex of any sort. Another product we'll be using at the end is gold leaf, liquid gold leaf. We'll be using that as a finishing product. Again, vapors, so you're going to want to make sure you have a well-ventilated area for both of these products. We will also be using a paint thinner, turpentine product today. All of these products, vapors, make sure everything is ventilated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a plastic palette knife to apply the Liquitex. Don't use a really nice palette knife you're happy to use with your oil paints, but not with this product because it will ruin a nice palette knife. Plastic one, you're going to want to make sure you wipe it off frequently. When I start with this process, I always have a simple sketch on the canvas. I don't start with a lot of detail because I'm going to cover it up. The first layer, it's like you are frosting a cake almost. You're trying to get a layer on that's somewhere between thick and thin. You don't want it to be too thick because when it dries, if it is too thick, the medium could crack. I like to start in the background first if I can. If you run onto your figure, it is not a big deal because you're going to apply more in that area. I don't use a huge palette knife because I like to be able to maneuver around. If you're using a bigger canvas, you may want to switch to a trowel or something that's larger, like a spackling knife. Because I'm fairly new to this medium, I'm still using a smaller instrument to apply.
Okay, when you say marble dust, like marble, like stone?
Yes, like stone. It's been ground up and it is part of the ingredients mixed in with the polymer. That's what gives it a stone feel when it's dry.
Okay.
And you can sand on it. You could use a Dremel tool on it if you wanted to. It's highly receptive to paint. One of the reasons why I enjoy using oil paint over this medium when it dries is that the oil paint drying time actually speeds up because this medium is very absorbent. When it dries, it will absorb the oil. So I'm going to put some of it on now, and then it needs to dry for about 24 hours. I recommend putting it next to a heat register, or if it's hot, if it's during summer, you can put it outside, and in Texas, it's going to dry pretty quick. So I'm just kind of marking my spots on here, trying not to make the central figure mesh into the background because, again, I'm going to let this dry overnight, and when I let it dry, I don't want to come back to it and forget where I put everything because I've covered up a lot of my drawing. Well, hopefully most of it. So one of my struggles when I got to the next layer was how to apply the next layer. You can use this to apply your next layer. You could be here for a while. Now I'm going to start making it a little bit thicker. So I was brainstorming one day and I came up with the ketchup bottle idea. It was the best and cheapest alternative.
Right.
And this thing got on my nerves for a whole minute, and I thought about cutting it off, but then you can't cap it, so my, blue painter's tape will keep it out of the way.
Right.
So I'm going to use this, and it's going to seem a lot like basting a cake. So if you've ever decorated a cake, this may make you hungry, but trust me, if you were here, the smell would not.
Okay.
Now, first when you start squeezing it out, it's going to very much look like you're basting a cake. And you might say, oh, well, I don't like the way I look, or that looks. So that's when you're going to use your knife. Try to develop better habits than I have and wipe your knife off frequently, because if it dries, your knife is ruined. As I apply the texture, I'm going to play with it as I go and figure out how I want it to look. But I can apply more by using the squeeze bottle than I can by just using the knife. And it's a little bit easier and less painstaking. I didn't do a great job of marking where I want them to go, so I'm going to use a little bit of guesswork. I'm going to give them some eyebrows, and then I'm going to smear it as I go to make it look like it's part of it and not resting on top.
Okay.
The goal is kind of to make it look like it was all done in the same day or during the same session. But I tried that once, to do it all at once, and I wound up with a cracked mess that was not savable. So it's very important to layer it. And you can't really get in a hurry with this stuff. It's not forgiving.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who's not really confident in their drawing abilities, this is actually a really fun medium to play with, because as you can see, you don't have to be some great draftsman to be able to create something with this stuff. Okay, so I've kind of used the end of my palette knife to create the inner shape of the eye and push it in. So now I know where my eyes are going to be. And while all of this texture is good, I'm pretty happy with it, I'm going to add a little bit more to the form around the Buddha. And then I'm going to start working on the hat, because I want to do something completely different with the Buddha crown area. A generous amount around the outline here. I want my shoulder to kind of pop off the background. Again, the goal here is to make it look sculptural, like it's coming off the background.
So
if the bottle isn't squeezing enough that you want, you can cut this to make it squeeze out more. I like it to squeeze out a little bit at a time, because I can always put more on the canvas. It's hard to scrape it off and put it back in the bottle. And I'm just making some lines where they would go, some directional lines where they would be. Again, I want all of this to look fairly ancient and not detail oriented. But what I do want is to create something different on the Buddha's head. So now I'm going to turn my canvas around, because if I lean over it right now,
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to smash the cake.
Yeah.
Another thing that is important when working with this medium is that while it is drying, it's got to be flat. You need this to be flat while it's drying. The marble dust is fairly heavy, and if you try to stand it up on an easel while it's drying, all of your material is going to go sliding off your canvas. Okay, so for my Buddha's statue's head, I want to make it very different texturally from the rest of the piece. So I'm going to use a series of squeezing and lifting motions. Again, a lot like you're baking or decorating a cake. It's a lot like you are decorating a cake. And I'm going to fill up his headdress with these. This is the most painstaking part if you employ this sort of texture to any piece. I'm going to try to get these as close together as I can to not leave a whole bunch of gaps. I want these to be fairly sharp standing up. If they start leaning over, I'm not worried about that, again, because I'm not going on for perfection with this. I'm going for something that's aged. It's supposed to look old. It's not supposed to be perfect. And remember while you're using this that you have to give up a certain amount of control with this medium. It's going to do what it wants to do. Now I'm going to use a very thin mixture of oil paint and turpentine to give it kind of a wash. I'm going to start with black and a little bit of phthalo blue, a lamp black and a phthalo blue, and this mixture is just going to kind of soak it up. I'm going to use more turpentine, then I do my oil paint, and then I'm going to kind of drain off the excess turpentine off of the piece. For this, I'm going to use a very stiff boar's hair brush because this is a rough material. Don't use a brush that you are in love with and that you've had for 20 years and it's your baby and you've named it, because you could very well ruin your brush. On the other hand, though, if you have a brush where you haven't been kind to it and the bristles have gotten a little bit stiff because you've knocked some paint in there and maybe the end of it is just a little stiff to work with, that is the perfect brush to use for this. Because once you start using this brush in that texture, it's going to loosen those bristles back up. For my palette today, I'm using a just baking pan. I'm not using my regular palette because I'm going to be using a lot of turpentine and I don't want it to go everywhere. I don't want it to get all over the table. I want to contain my mess as much as possible.
All right.
So I'm going to make my colors kind of meet here in the middle. So I have some lamp black on one side, and I have phthalo blue on the other side. I like phthalo blue because it has the bluish tint and it's got a little bit of green. It mixes well with the black. Black can be very dull by itself. Okay. So now that the texturing is complete, I'm doing a thin glaze wash with the oil paint on top of it. I'm using a lot more turpentine than oil paint with this. The texture is very absorbent. It will soak up the oil paint and the turpentine in a relatively short amount of time. You can usually add another layer within 20 to 30 minutes. It's better to work in layers. If you put too much paint on the canvas, the texture won't pick it up. It won't dry as fast. You'll have a very slow drying time. I'm going to do something different to this part here in a minute, the crown of the Buddha. I'm going to use my brush on that, completely different than I'm doing the rest of this. So that's going to be the last thing that I put any medium on. Don't want to spill my paint in it. For this piece, I have a particular challenge of that with my Buddha headdress crown part, because I don't want to take my brush and just start smearing it all over this. I might break off the tips of these. I might lose a few anyway, but I don't want to help that along. So I'm going to take my brush, dip it in this liquidy medium, and press down into it. And that liquid is going to settle. It's going to gravitate all the way to the bottom and get in between all those little spaces. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a hairdryer, and I'm going to force the paint downward so I can drain it all off of my canvas. Any extra liquid, I want to get that out of there because it's super saturated right now and it's just kind of pooling. Okay, so now my wash is complete on my piece, but I have a lot of standing turpentine paint thinner on my piece, and I don't want that. I need to get that out of there, and the best way to do that is to drain the liquid off. So I've got a hairdryer here that I'm going to use, and I'm going to use gravity to help me along.
Okay.
I've put some paper towels underneath my canvas to help me out. And I'm going to just tilt it up. And you can see, even without using the hairdryer, it's already starting to run off. But this is going to help it along. And it's also going to help me out because I want to put more paint on my canvas. Another layer. And in order to do that, I need to get some water. One thing that can happen while it's draining down is if you start to see this. If it's splattered and you don't want that there, Just get yourself a paper towel and wipe it off. It's still going to be dark. I kind of like it this way because it adds to the stone, but if it's something that is going to, you think, ruin your piece, don't get worried. You still have more painting to do on top of this. Now that it's fairly liquid dry, I can do a couple of housekeeping issues to it. If there is any standing liquid on there that I still see, I'm going to go in and dab it and just try to get any excess off of the canvas that I don't want. Okay, we've passed through a few steps to get closer to the finished product. And what I've done on this is added, through layers and layers, I've added more color to the background to push it back. I've added some white and some light grays on the Buddha's outfit, body, and the face to bring it some three-dimensionality. Especially the face, I felt it necessary to make the face a little more lifelike than the body. So what I tried to do is use darks along the shadows of the cheeks toward the ears and underneath the brows of the eyes. I also added some shadows near the headdress or crown because I felt that it would hover over the brow line and the forehead. I used my larger brush and my medium brush to add a little more black in these recesses of the headdress so that it looked farther away. While I was working on this, I was using white at first to do my highlights, and I realized it didn't quite have the punch I was looking for. So I switched to liquid leaf. And there are a lot of different ways to apply liquid leaf. If you have a smooth surface and you want to just texture with liquid leaf, a sponge like this works great. I did not use a sponge because I was worried it would tear off into my texture and give me more of a headache. So what I used was actually just a regular paper towel, and I just got a little bit on my paper towel and gave myself a little bit of a surface to work with. Not a whole lot hanging over, because you still have the problem that it might tear off into the texture. So I'm just hitting the tops. The tops of the texture was all I wanted to hit with this, to give it that gilded look. One thing that was a big concern when I started working on this, one thing that was a big concern when I started working on this step was what was going to happen when I shoved my paper towel on top of all of these little pointy, gnarly things. And I did have to pick out some paper towel. But what I did, when I started working on the headdress particularly, I just dabbed it and straight up. If I didn't have enough, I got a little bit more on my paper towel and went over it again. You can always add more, but it's hard to take it away. When I was finished with the gold leaf portion of the painting, I went back to the face because something was still missing. I wanted the eyes to look a little more lifelike and wasn't quite sure how to do that given the texture that I'd put on the canvas. So I went on the internet and found some reference photos of eyes to start working with, and then I decided it was time to switch gears and put the painting on the easel to work on. I had decided that it was time to switch gears and put my painting on the easel to work on the eyeballs and the face a little bit. I wanted the eyes to look somewhat realistic, but I was struggling with that because of all of the texture in here. So I started using my camera as a tool because I realized that I wasn't seeing the eyeballs. I was seeing the texture. So while I painted, I opened up my phone and I would use my camera app with one hand, and I would paint with the other, and I realized that I was seeing the eyeballs now and not the texture. So I held the camera on it while I painted in. That helped me see the form of the eye better and not just think I'm painting on texture. There's no way it's going to look right.
That's our program for today. We'd like to thank our sponsors for making this program possible, and we'd like to thank you, our audience. We look forward to seeing you again when we embark on another arts adventure.